you're very famous for talking about the biological carpet. How about if we start there, Roger? Like, what's wrong with the soils that we got?
Well, I think the first thing we have to understand is I look at the world from the point of view of a whole. I see a whole human. And you, as a whole human, do you realize that you've got more bacteria cells in you than you've got human cells?
Yes. Yes.
So what is a whole human?
Right.
Exactly. Now, as a whole human, if I take you out of your family, will your family continue to function or will it collapse?
I'm pretty important in my family. No, I'm just kidding. No, they would do just fine without me.
They'd be now, okay? So if you're removed from your whole family, your whole family continues. But if I take your heart out of your whole, will you continue to function or will you
No.
collapse?
Right. Of
Okay.
course.
So we need to understand that there are holes within holes.
Okay.
Now, the next biggest hole above you, I'm not even going to ask you because most people don't get it, but the next biggest hole above you is green growing plants.
Okay.
Without them, you can't get oxygen. So, if we remove your heart, you collapse. And if we remove all the trees, you collapse. But if we remove you from your family continues. So
Right.
people struggle to understand these holes and how they fit together. Now, when we look at soil, what I realized was that soil is a living organism, just like you're a living organism, but you're made of more bacteria cells than human cells. Well, we know, it depends on, most people can't even see these numbers, but they talk about 1 trillion life forms being a teaspoon of healthy soil. So it's too much, and we only know this from electron microscopes and DNA because we've never actually seen it. There's so much complexity to soil. So one of the things I figured out when I began to see that, okay, hold on, soil isn't the stuff we walk on, it's this complex living organism. And that is now if you think about it, humans plowed up soil. It's called dirt. We disrespect it. We build houses out of it.
Yeah.
We bury our dead in it. It never meant anything. But when you suddenly realize that, no, this is actually a complex living organism, then you start thinking about it differently. You're a pretty woman. Do you realize that you've got 134 different organisms living on a single eyelash?
Well, I'm a science nerd, so I have read that book.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Yes. Yes. It's
and it's
crazy.
this,
Yeah.
it's crazy, this complexity. Well, it's the same with soil. So then I asked myself a couple of simple questions. I said, what is the difference between sand and soil?
Mm.
Can you answer that? Science nerd?
I would think that sand is mostly silica, like pretty one dimensional. Okay, it has clay and other things in it, but soil probably has, it's probably down to the biodiversity that you have. It's got like many
So
different kinds of elements, and then
you,
there's all this organic
you've
stuff.
answered it, but you over answered it. The only difference
Okay.
between sand and soil is life.
Okay.
It's sand until we add life to it, then it becomes soil. It's as simple as that. Okay, so now let me ask another simple question. What does all life need to live?
I think it starts with photosynthesis, but maybe oxygen.
Close, but it's energy. All life
Okay.
needs energy.
Okay.
Okay. Now, below the ground, what is the source of that energy? And you've just given the answer. It's photosynthesis.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we ask the next question, what's the difference between a fertile soil and an infertile soil? No, quantity of life. Okay. So if we want a fertile soil, we've got to have lots of life. Lots of life requires lots of photosynthesis, pumping energy in to support that life. So it's as simple as that. We can have sand or we can have fertile soils just based on the decisions we make. How can we protect that life in the soils and pump as much energy into it year round? Well, I guarantee agriculture does the exact opposite of that. We plow our soils, so the microorganisms that live in the top millimeter get taken 10 inches down and they die. The ones that come from 10 inches down up to the surface, they die. Them dying releases the nitrogen in their bodies. And that's what we think, oh, when we plow up virgin land, oh, it has such a boost. The boost is from killing life. That's why traditionally you had 3 years of slash and burn, plow, and then they had to move on to a new piece of land because after 3 years they'd killed all the life in the soil. Life is a living organism, complex living organism. We have to protect it from ultraviolet light, and we have to get photosynthesis, plants photosynthesizing, pumping energy under all year round to get it as healthy and fertile as possible. And it's as simple as that when you break it down to the simple components.
Mm,
Now, what in our management is doing that? Very little. But now people are beginning to understand cover cropping, because we've been able to explain these concepts to people and they're beginning to get it. And that's why a lot of regenerative agriculture talks about cover cropping. It's just based on that very simple concept of
mhm.
creating healthy soils.
You have a great story about something that you observed in Zimbabwe after they put this in practice?
So, yeah, a lot of people ask me, well, what's the fastest you've ever fixed a piece of land? And I get to go, tap, tap, tap. It had nothing to do with me. It was all coincidence. But we turned a piece of land around basically in 6 weeks. We went from red, hard capped soil with shale underneath it, absolutely no organic matter. We did a biological carpet, 100 meters by 100 meters. We had 600 cattle and a bunch of goats and sheep sleep on it for a week. They put an inch layer of dung and urine, and that was enough to protect it from ultraviolet light. And then this was in the dry season, and then 2 weeks later it rained. Well, the first thing that happened after the rain was millions, and I literally mean millions. I'm not speaking figuratively. Millions of mushrooms germinated and started growing. But I have never seen so many species of mushrooms. There were little blue ones, there were big ones, there were fat ones, there were pink ones, there were yellow ones. I have never seen so many mushrooms. And it was just covered in this carpet of mushrooms. And then the mushrooms all dried up, wilted, and died. And on about day 10, it looked like a chia pet. Millions more little green grass plants started germinating and growing. And 6 weeks later, we had some of the grasses were overhead high, but we had this whole biodiversity of grasses. And where it really triggered me with, okay, this is what's going on, was we had a group of about 70 women coming in every day from the villages who were coming to cut thatching grass. And as they walked past this plot every day, they were fine walking past. But then one day, this old woman went, they make this noise, and she made this noise, and and she just grabbed these young children and she just rushed into this plot. And she said, this is the grass we were telling you about, that we used to make our bridal baskets from when we were children. She hadn't seen it in about 50 years. But the fungi had tapped on the grass root and told it was safe to germinate, and it had germinated and grown. Since that occasion, we've seen the same thing occur in Canada, a new grass that the University of Saskatchewan hadn't recorded in 150 years. And then in Australia, a legume called Townsville lucerne that went extinct in 1979 reappeared on one of our biological plots 7 years ago and in mass. So these plant seeds are just sitting in the soil waiting for that symbiotic relationship for the fungi to tap them and say, it's safe to germinate and grow now, go ahead. Now, you think about that. So this soil, I said, is a living organism. The communicator in it and the master of ceremonies are the mycelial networks and the fungi. That is the brain of soil. So we've got to make decisions to protect the fungi from the ultraviolet light, to protect those initial bacteria, and the biological carpet is what does it, and that triggers and activates the soil's brain mycelium.